Welcome back to the NIL Era podcast. My name is Elise and
And I'm Fernando Andrade. As we've all seen, that's been football media days going on this past week, and the introduction of institutions to their new homes is coming up this upcoming week. So let's discuss conference realignment while we're at it. Again, Elise, per usual, the expert, I have so many questions for you. Let's start at the very, very, very basic of things. Can you give me an overview of what the conference realignment is looking like? Why is this happening? Where is this going? What's the situation looking like right now?
For sure. So beginning in August, schools will officially join their new conferences. We've already seen Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC in July, but starting in August, University of Arizona, ASU, Utah, and Colorado will join the Big 12. USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington join the Big 10, and Cal, Stanford, and SMU will join the ACC. So lots of movement is going to occur in these upcoming weeks.
We've talked about media rights deals before and how important they are and how much they affect things, but how did media rights specifically become the downfall of the Pac-12, which is the conference that we belong to, formerly at Cal as former student athletes? I think we all know what may have happened with the unfortunate death of the conference, but could we dive deep into why it happened and what media rights even has to do with this?
I think it is important to recognize the importance of these media rights deals. We've talked about it before, but looking specifically at the Pac-12, it really did all come down to media rights. Again, these are the TV media deals that bring in millions of dollars to the conference and then gets distributed to each institution. Again, kind of like that trickle-down system that happens institutionally. It happens at the conference level as well, divided between all universities. But at the time, the Pac-12 was doing very lucrative deals, and the previous Pac-12 media rights deal locked in the original 12 schools to a 12-year contract worth approximately $3 billion. So this deal provided around $250 million per year, which translated to roughly $20.8 million annually per school. So the contract primarily involved agreements with ESPN and Fox, covering both the television and digital broadcasting rights. But with the changing markets and growth of college athletics, a 12-year deal in the long run was just not ideal. For some more context there, taken from a Fox Sports article, it was stated that the old Big Ten media rights deal was a 6-year contract worth $2.64 billion, averaging about $440 million per year. This deal involved partnerships with Fox, ESPN, and CBS. However, with the new Big Ten latest media rights deal that was announced in 2022 and started in 2023, it's even more substantial. It's a 7-year agreement worth between $7 billion and $8 billion, averaging over $1 billion annually. This new deal includes Fox, CBS, NBC, and NBC streaming service Peacock, making it the most lucrative media rights deal in college sports history. So you're just seeing these deals become a little shorter with more partners involved, and now streaming partners like Peacock for the Big Ten. There's a big shift happening in just terms of distribution for college sports.
12 years ago, though, this deal for the Pac-12 with the Pac-12 network seemed to be a great situation in terms of media rights deals. So 12 years later, what happened?
I think it's important to realize also that the Pac-12 networks, it's a very regional-based network, even for women's gymnastics. If, let's say, UCLA came and competed against Cal at home in Haas Pavilion, a lot of fans of gymnastics couldn't watch our meets unless they had the Pac-12 network Bay Area, like regional network. So the distribution of the Pac-12 networks in terms of just outreach was a little difficult for people to follow along with the conference, especially Olympic sports. But in terms of this media rights deal that happened 12 years ago, I think for the Pac-12, when USC and UCLA announced it will be joining the Big Ten in June of 2022, The Pac-12 should have locked down a new media rights deal immediately. They had 2 years until the rights deal expired, and they just waited way too long to get a legitimate new deal. And even looking at this past football season, the Pac-12 had legit football contenders. The Pac-12 had a conference of powerhouse programs. They have a dynasty of success and a legacy of champions. Yet it all imploded with what felt like a matter of days. So the problem isn't the institutions in the conference. I think it was the management of the media rights deal. I think there are a lot of stories of who caused this implosion. Was it Fox Sports? Was it the Big Ten? There's rumors that ESPN never even showed up to this meeting that encompassed ESPN, so ADs just didn't feel comfortable with the deal. But I think the real cause was just the lack of urgency to secure a new deal and the old Pac-12 commissioner's lack of perspective of where college athletics could grow. From now on, I can guarantee you will not see media rights deals being longer than 7 or 8 years. 12 years is just way too long to lock down a deal when we're seeing so much growth, and it's kind of hard to predict what next sport is going to be the next big thing. Volleyball's taking off. We saw women's basketball taking off. Who else is next is going to be the question.
There's obviously a lot of sadness around the end of the Pac-12, the Conference of Champions, but it's also important to consider that there's so much more to this besides the business, besides the media rights deals, besides even just college football. There's so many student athletes being affected and impacted by this, and while this may sound like champagne problems, I do think that people don't understand that student athletes' lives will completely change moving forward, and it will impact both the student performance and the athlete performance. So Could we dive deep into how that will be impacting these student athletes on a day-to-day basis?
I think that's a great question and just perspective. I think until you live the student athlete lifestyle, no one really realizes how hard it is. Like, you're a full-time student, you're a full-time athlete. At the same time, you're trying to figure out your next steps post-grad. You're trying to be a normal college student, so it's a lot. And with conference realignment, I think the impact will be a lot rougher than people are anticipating. Even for Cal, I know our administration is doing the best they can to prepare and get ahead of this. But until you actually live it in real time, I don't think you know what you're up against. So in terms of the impact of conference realignment, I think there's kind of 3 big buckets that I think are going to happen. So I'll kind of run through the first one, and then we can discuss just to make it more digestible. But I think the first concern is obviously the travel. The amount of travel for these programs every week to a new time zone is going to be a lot. And like you said, the champagne problems, yes, I know it's part of the sport and part of being a high-level athlete, but it's also so draining. At the end of the day, these student athletes, we're human. They're 18 to 22-year-olds, sometimes a little younger, sometimes a little older, but everyone's young, and this is kind of the first time they're going through something like this. So when you're traveling, you're losing recovery time, you're losing rest. Coming from the West Coast, we aren't used to competing or training in these new climates. I think that's something that obviously we must adapt to, but it's also, how do we be proactive about it? Do we get more Normatex or Venoms to warm up before going out to play a game in the snow? And with that recovery, I think mental health in athletes, as it continues to become a more transparent conversation, I think athletic departments and coaches must be cognizant of how their student athletes are feeling mentally and just intrinsically as conference realignment is upon us.
Totally. And I think it's important to just even think about this. Could you name a single pro sport that travels coast to coast twice a month?
No.
I can't think of one. I can't think of a professional league that would set up any team to be traveling coast to coast twice a month, even if it's only for a semester. That's still a lot. And it's just not logical. You stay on the road, you stay there for multiple weeks at a time. But to be doing this sometimes back-to-back weekends even, I haven't looked at all the schedules for all the sports, but to think about something like soccer coming up in the fall, to be playing on a different coast twice a month, that's a lot. You're missing a lot of school as well, because obviously the travel is just so much more. And let's go into the details of how this affects things. Football, again, first off, do they deserve this? Of course, they're bringing in the money, but they will be on chartered flights. They will be fine. But then you look at other sports, i.e. soccer, men's soccer, and you're talking about indirect flights. Like that is not ideal when you're trying to compete at the highest level, both athletically and academically. Let me remind people, this is UC Berkeley we're talking about, and there's so many other schools as well. UCLA, USC, Stanford. Those are not easy academic schools. Those are some of the top institutions on the planet, and to be having student athletes travel hours at a time, like we're talking half a day at a time, that's a lot when you're asking for the most of them academically and athletically. And sure, there will be people that say champagne problems is part of the job, but is it ideal? No. And is it worth it for the media rights deals? I mean, probably. We're talking about billions of dollars, right? This doesn't matter. The players come in and out every 4 years. The billions stay there for a long time. But that just shows you, again, everything we've been talking about in the prior episodes. This is a business. Every single time we get closer and closer and closer to pro sports, because this is what's gonna happen. And at least you can tell me if I'm wrong. Academics are going to be pushed to the side when you're in season. So it's typical to say, take not so hard classes when you're in season, take harder classes in the summer, and then take a regular load when you're off season semester. But now, how many legit classes can you be taking in season? When you really think about it, how many legit classes can you do? I actually talked with a field hockey player, because field hockey is one of the teams that has experience traveling to the East Coast. And this student athlete missed midterm exams, missed plenty of lectures because they just did not provide them remotely. So when you think about it, it's like you're trying to make the best of your education and compete at the highest level, but the university and athletic department is just not coming together to support that. So it presents an entire issue. This is what we know at Cal. I'm sure USC, UCLA, Stanford, etc. There's 12 Pac-12 schools. I'm sure they're all going through this, but it's so much bigger than we can imagine. There's football, men's basketball, women's basketball. They will be fine. But what about the tennis player? What about the soccer player? What about the golf player? What happens with them? And it leads to plenty of concerns of mine to end the rant of the student before athlete model having to cut sports eventually, because that's another thing. If we're going to go back to the business, how many flights can athletic departments afford? Can an athletic department afford flying out all of their teams coast to coast multiple times a season? I'm not sure. So it definitely does worry me on how it will impact not only current student athletes, but the future of college sports, at least on the West Coast, because the biggest, most important institutions on the West Coast will all be facing this problem this upcoming season.
Yep, I 100% agree. And that was like 100% my second impact of this conference realignment is the academics. I think, like you said, missing that much class time for increased travel and the potential acclimation time to the East Coast or Midwest time difference, the amount of lectures, discussions, exams missed, they inevitably add up. I know at Cal, they, especially for football during this past season, they were gone during finals week for the bowl game. So they had to travel even more people in terms of academic staff of our academic advisors, so they're able to proctor exams. That's going to have to become the new normal if just you keep missing so many of your exams and there's not anyone who's like certified to proctor you. So it's like more plane tickets, if anything, for now the academic staff who sit in athletics. But I think in terms of preparation for Cal. I've sat on a working group on academic accommodations for this ACC move. They're trying to prepare for this move. And like you said, these are university sanctioned events that we travel to. And I personally believe that we should have the ability to have recorded lectures. If you require us to go to class, we should be able to consume this content when we're on the road. It's not like we're choosing to travel, like it's not a choice. Like you're a part of this program and you're expected to travel with the team. So we should be able to get the notes, get the lectures, still somewhat be a student even when we're not in season. Because it happens right now. Like it's a kind of an unspoken thing that during season, you try not to schedule any class on Fridays because you're either playing a game or you're traveling on a Friday and you're going to miss it. So it's already happening. So I would be really interested to see if we start seeing a shift in less academically rigorous majors for these incoming freshmen or transfers. I think at Cal, we have a pretty good amount of STEM majors within the student-athlete population, which is great. And I know they're the ones who I think get hit the hardest when we're in season and we're traveling because they can't even make up the labs. They can't make up the lectures. So it's very hard for them to stay on top of their academics. But they all have a passion for what they do. They either are pre-med, want to get into research, things like that. So I'm interested to see if we see a decline in those academically very rigorous majors because of this move.
And real quick on that, Elise, going back to the business side of things, it's not only the plane tickets for these extra proctors for exams. It's plane tickets and hotel rooms and food and tickets to the game. All of those add up. They all do. And again, football has its privileges. Rightfully so. They've earned it. They deserve it. We all benefit off of them. Give them whatever they need. But it's like, can you afford that for all of the other teams? And I know at Cal that there are plenty of teams that will not be traveling back and forth. For example, I know the cross-country team will only be going to the ACC championships. That's it. They don't have to travel for anything else. I know a sport like swim will probably not be as impacted because they can stay on the West Coast and they will only have to travel for championships. But what about everybody else? And can you afford that? And when you are on the business side of things, when there is no passion for the sport, and when you just look at these numbers, these cold, objective numbers, it's illogical. It is illogical to keep all these teams. It makes no sense. You're just hurting yourself financially. So it leads to hurting the student before athlete model, and it hurts the entire finances of an athletic department. So it definitely does worry me personally. I know you have one more point to get to, but I just wanted to squeeze this in of like financially, it's just not going to make sense because you have to cover so many different things. And before someone says, well, if they want to be pre-med, they don't have to be student athletes. I know being a student athlete is a privilege, but it should be something, it should be a right if somebody has the ability to do so. It should be something that's supported by the university. I'm not even talking about the athletic department anymore. It should be something that is supported by a university. The Olympics started today. Today was opening ceremony. The day that we're recording this was opening ceremony. Where do you think most of those student athletes are coming from? Not only the US, the entire Olympic, like I would take a wild guess and say that a large percentage of Olympians there went through the NCAA system. Again, I'll repeat the same stat I did episode 1. If the Pac-12 would have been a country at the Tokyo 2021 Olympics, they would have placed 5th in countries with the most medals. That just provides perspective of what we're talking about. So these lesser Olympic sports that we're not going to financially take care of, what happens to those student athletes? Where do they get access to train for track and field, for a sport like swimming? What happens to them? Because even the pros, they stay there to just work there. Because there is no pro league to go to. There is no sign a pro contract with a club and you train at their facilities. That doesn't happen. And these are smart people as well. So do you give up an education? Do you prioritize your athletics? What happens there? And that's what worries me a lot about this entire business model. End of rant. Continue.
I 100% agree. Like, no notes. Agreed. To kind of wrap up my last point here, I think the last impact I see is the level of competition. Just for myself, I always grew up wanting to be in the Pac-12 conference. In terms of my recruiting, I really only looked at West Coast schools. I grew up, my dad went to USC. I grew up a USC fan. USC doesn't have a women's gymnastics team, so I knew I wasn't going to go there. But they were part of the Pac-12. I grew up watching Pac-12 networks. I wanted to be in this conference. And by no means am I saying that these student athletes aren't excited to compete in new environments, new stadiums, and experience new fans. But I think there's a lot to say of the original home that we were a part of in terms of the Pac-12. For beach volleyball, for example, the Pac-12 had a powerhouse beach conference. And now Cal specifically, they're competing in the MPSF because most conferences don't sponsor beach volleyball. In terms of women's gymnastics, the Pac-12 consistently sends multiple teams to the NCAA championships. The ACC just started sponsoring women's gymnastics this past season, so thankfully my team will still get to compete at the Power 5 level, but there's a lot of factors that people don't see. Even for myself, I knew I wanted to be in the Pac-12, but I really wanted to compete at a Power 5 level. I knew what the Power 5 conferences were in my recruiting, and I was like, I want to go there. So if I were to compete in a Power 5 conference, recruited, and that's what knew I wanted to do, what conference I wanted to be in, and then with conference realignment, you're no longer competing at the Power 5 level, I would be sad. Like, I want to compete with the best of the best, and not saying like the MPSF is not the best of the best. I'm not saying that. It's just the level of resources is different, and that's a harsh reality, but that is the reality. And I'm very thankful and happy that my teammates and former team get to experience a new Power 5 conference, but it's also very, very bittersweet to see this level of competition in the Conference of Champions to be lost and kind of distributed elsewhere. But I think those are a lot of different impacts that people didn't really realize in terms of conference realignment.
Elise, I am curious. You were very involved within Cal Athletics. You were very involved at the Pac-12 level and even the national level at Division I. Being the president of SAC at Cal and even the leader of the student athlete leadership team of the Pac-12, did you have any involvement or say with this set of realignment meetings, realignment talks?
I would loosely say I had involvement, very loosely. I wouldn't say it was a real decision-making conversation by any means, but our athletic director did bring in SAC leadership to a call before the ACC move for Cal was announced. It was really just a conversation about what we wanted in terms of a new conference and our home, and just what was happening on his end as athletic director. I think it was a great conversation around what our concerns were. We didn't want sports cut, but at the same time, we did want to compete at the highest level we could. And our athletic director brought in the reasons of we are either joining the ACC or the AAC. ACC is a Power 5 conference. They have like-minded institutions. That was a big push for Cal and Stanford to, one, stay together as the Bay Area institutions, but also we bring a level of academic rigor that helped us so much. I think if Cal and Stanford if we weren't academically rigorous and academically excellent as institutions, I don't think we would have found another home, if I'm being just completely honest. So I think we were very lucky there that the Cal and Stanford brand, it definitely helped us in terms of the ACC move. I'm happy that we were able to be involved in that conversation. Not saying that it was kind of just like a check of a box, but I think when I first started at Cal, there's no way that SAC leadership would have been involved in those conversations. I think that's something that I was pushing for very heavily. That's something that the old Cal SAC president, Jam, was pushing for. We wanted to be in those conversations because it affects us. Like, it affects your student athletes. So if you don't know what they're thinking, how can you make an actual valid decision that affects them? Like, you need to hear it from them. And again, that goes back to having a seat at the table, building those relationships, building your credibility of you are educated in the landscape, you are authentic to who you are and your experience, and then advocating from there.
To finish off this episode, for those that couldn't tell, we are obviously quite biased towards the Pac-12. We as co-hosts are from the Bay Area and Southern California, so obviously we grew up with this conference. So to end it on that note, Elise, what's something you'll miss about the Pac-12, something you used to love about it, anything you would like to share about the Conference of Champions?
For myself, the Pac-12 allowed me to just experience opportunities I never even dreamed of doing. This conference allowed me to experience some of the highest places of the student-athlete voice. I will full-heartedly stand by the fact that the Pac-12 was the most pro-student-athlete out of any of the conferences. I think the models like the SALT model that allowed student-athletes to propose legislation, SALT stands for the Student-Athlete Leadership Team. We had votes at council meetings, had a voice in rooms of the ADs, FARs, SWAs, and the Pac-12 commissioner. And this SALT model was just such an influential model in terms of college athletics. They were trailblazers of the student athlete. They were champions for female sports, for Olympic sports, for Olympic dreams. And I think that something you don't really see until you're honestly in the positions that I'm so thankful to have held. The people behind the conference cared about their athletes' experience both on and off the field. And I think that's just so amazing. And I'm so thankful to have had this experience. And I just really hope the new homes for these schools and their institutions and their new conferences will do the same. Because as this just becomes more and more transparently a business, the holistic student-athlete model that we kind of grew up upon is starting to be a little lost, but that's what was amazing about college athletics, is developing who you are as an athlete, as a student, as a friend, as a leader. And that's what I took away after my 4 years of who was I outside of gymnastics, and the experiences the Pac-12 allowed me to have just helped me develop that and that voice and who I am today. And just the utmost respect for the Pac-12, the people involved in the Pac-12, and back the Pac forever. Now working in the Big Ten, I've adopted those 4 expansion schools. Like, I love them. I will always be rooting for them. But yeah, I will always love the Pac-12.
Could not have said it better myself, and I will actually just leave it there because I don't want to add anything or distract from that. But I think that's a great way to close out today's episode, specifically on conference realignment. You touched on very important points there. And yeah, hopefully it works out for the better. I think that the idealistic model of the Pac-12, which we both loved, is unfortunately what caused it to die in today's business model for conferences. But yeah, hopefully the student-athlete model can just persist. My bias there is I'm a huge fan of the Olympics. You know that even before I showed up to Cal, one of my favorite things about the school was that I would get to see the track and field team, the swim team, and the gymnastics team, and that's how we became friends, obviously. But that was like one of my favorite things because I knew that I get to see that at Cal, at the Pac-12. So hopefully all the other conferences can do the same. But for now, that's it for conference realignment. Is there anything else you would like to add, Elise?
No, I think that's it. I think everyone listening, stay up to date on what's happening in the landscape in terms of these joining conferences. August 2nd is a huge day in terms of the Big Ten. We're expecting announcing, publishing all the different Pac-12 classics on the network. It's a big day, August 2nd.
Awesome. And then just a quick note to leave it out for today's episode, Elise. This is episode 5 of the podcast, and just a fun fact, 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. So we're in the top 10% already. Of that remaining 10%, 90% don't make it to episode 20. So we'll have to get to episode 21 to be in the top 1%. But for now, we're in the top 10. 5 weeks, 5 episodes. We got to keep it rolling. And that's it for today. If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow on Spotify. If you would like to share this with friends, would be amazing. For those that haven't seen, there are clips now on YouTube. If you don't want to watch the full episode or send the full episode to a friend, send them a clip. 2 minutes. You can check it out right there. But for now, that's it for today, and we will see you all next week for episode 6.
Bye.